When my husband stood up in court and told the judge I had no money, no home, and no power, he did not look at me once. He looked at the polished wooden rail in front of him, calm and careful, like he was reading a weather report, instead of describing the woman he had slept beside for 16 years. Then he said the sentence that made my hands go cold in my lap. Mrs. Calloway has no access to any marital assets, Your Honor. She has no independent income, no residence of her own, and no role in the company. 3 rows behind me, Elias Monroe rested one hand on a black file and said nothing. My name is Marin Calloway. I was 39 years old that morning, sitting in family court in Kansas City, Missouri, wearing a navy dress I had bought on clearance 2 weeks earlier because my husband had canceled every card with my name on it. For 12 years I had managed the invoices, payroll, vendor accounts, tax folders, and cash flow for the construction business Gideon liked to call his life's work. I knew every dollar that came in. I knew every dollar that went out. And I knew he was lying. The strange part was not that Gideon lied. By then, I had learned he could lie with a hand on a Bible, a smile on his face, and a story prepared for anyone willing to believe him. The strange part was how completely he had rewritten me. In his version, I was a dependent wife who had drifted through his success without understanding it. A woman who had been given everything and contributed nothing. He had built that version of me, one sentence at a time. The judge, a silver-haired woman named Judge Whitmore, adjusted her glasses and looked toward Gideon's attorney. No residence of her own. Attorney Bell nodded smoothly. Correct, Your Honor. Mrs. Calloway moved out voluntarily and is currently staying with a friend. The marital home is owned by Calloway Infrastructure Holdings, not either individual spouse. Mr. Calloway's personal liquidity is also limited due to company obligations. Gideon sat beside him in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my rent for 3 months. His wedding ring was gone. Mine was still in the bottom of my purse, wrapped in a tissue, because I had not yet decided whether throwing it away would make me feel stronger or simply more tired. He looked successful. That was always his talent. He knew how to look like the man people wanted to trust. Before the company grew, before the contracts and trucks and polished office in Overland Park, Gideon had been a man with a pickup, a borrowed ladder, and a temper he called ambition. We met when I was 23 and working as a billing assistant for a medical supply distributor. He was funny then, loud, confident, always talking about the future like he had already signed the lease on it. He said he wanted a wife who believed in him before anyone else did. I believed in him so completely that I mistook it for love. When he started Calloway Infrastructure, it was just him and one subcontractor doing small commercial repair jobs. I handled invoices at our kitchen table after my day job. I called suppliers during lunch breaks. I built spreadsheets after midnight while Gideon slept beside me, exhausted from job sites and promises. I negotiated payment plans with vendors who wanted to cut us off. I caught duplicate charges. I kept the payroll from bouncing twice in our first year. No one applauded that part. But the business survived because of it. By the time we bought the house on Maple Street, Calloway Infrastructure had 18 employees, 4 company trucks, and more debt than Gideon liked to admit. The house had a wide front porch with white railings and a maple tree that dropped red leaves all over the driveway every October. I loved that house in a quiet way. Not because it was beautiful, though it was. I loved it because it felt earned. Every wall held some piece of our struggle. Gideon liked to tell people he bought it for me. He never said I had helped him afford it. The first time he truly erased me in public was at his sister's Christmas dinner. I had spent the whole afternoon helping his mother cook while Gideon stood in the living room telling everyone about a new municipal contract our company had landed. His brother-in-law raised a glass and said, "You really built something impressive, man." Gideon smiled, put his arm around my shoulders and said, "Marin keeps the receipts. I build the business." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. That was the worst habit I ever had with Gideon. I laughed when something hurt because I thought making it smaller would stop it from becoming real. Later that night, when I told him it embarrassed me, he looked at me with that tired expression he used whenever I asked him to see me as a person instead of an inconvenience. "A wife doesn't own a business just because she knows where the receipts are," he said. Then he rolled over and went to sleep. I lay awake beside him until dawn. The money started disappearing about 8 months before he locked me out. At first it was subtle. Payments routed through unfamiliar vendors. Equipment leases that did not match anything in our inventory. Consulting fees to companies with vague names and no websites. One was called Kestrel Development Group. Another was Ravelin Asset Management. They sounded professional enough that most people would never question them. But I had built our books from the ground up. I knew which numbers belonged there. I printed the transaction reports and left them on Gideon's desk. I expected an explanation. Maybe a careless assistant. Maybe a vendor change I had missed. Maybe something ordinary. Instead, he came home late, dropped the papers on the kitchen counter, and stared at me like I had broken into his office. "You went through my executive accounts," he asked. "I went through company expenses," I said. "That is literally my job." "Not anymore." He said it quietly. That was what made it frightening. For years, Gideon's anger had arrived loud, slamming doors, raised voice, fists pressed against countertops. But as the company grew, his anger became softer, colder, more strategic. He learned that a man who whispered could make a woman look hysterical without ever raising his own voice. "I'm restructuring the company," he told me. "We have exposure, taxes, loans, legal protections. You would not understand the larger picture." "I understand numbers." "You understand spreadsheets." That was the night I realized he no longer saw me as his partner. He saw me as a witness. Within a month, he had changed passwords, moved payroll approvals, and hired a 26-year-old operations assistant named Lacey to streamline internal communication. I was still allowed to work technically, but every decision I had once made was now reviewed by Gideon first. Every vendor call had to go through Lacey. Every file I touched seemed to disappear into folders I could no longer access. Then, Gideon started coming home after midnight. He said he was working. I stopped asking. The morning he locked me out, I had gone to the bank to withdraw money for groceries. My card declined. I tried again at another ATM. Declined. I called the bank and the woman on the phone told me all joint accounts had been closed the previous evening. I drove home with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The code on the garage door had changed. The front key no longer worked. There was a single envelope taped to the porch. Inside was a cashier's check for $2,000 and a note written in Gideon's neat, controlled handwriting. "Marin, this is temporary. Please do not make this harder than it has to be. You need space to calm down." I stood on that porch for nearly 10 minutes, staring at the house I had helped pay for, the house where I had folded his clothes and paid his employees, and sat beside him during every victory dinner. Through the window, I could see the dining room light on. He was inside. He just would not open the door. 3 days later, I received court papers accusing me of financial misconduct, emotional instability, and interference with company operations. Gideon claimed I had compromised business accounts and created risk for the company. He requested control of all marital property while the divorce moved forward. His filing described me as unemployed, financially dependent, and unable to manage complex business assets. I read that phrase 6 times. Unable to manage complex business assets. I had spent 12 years keeping those assets alive. I did not call Gideon. I did not scream through the door. I did not post anything online or call his family, even though his sister sent me a text saying, "Gideon says you've been under a lot of stress lately. I hope you get the help you need." That text hurt more than I expected. Not because I cared what she thought. Because I realized how long he had been preparing them to believe I was the problem. Instead, I called Elias Monroe. Elias had handled my personal tax returns for 6 years and had once worked as an outside accountant for Callaway Infrastructure. Gideon had fired him 2 months before locking me out, saying he wanted a more modern financial team. Elias was 68, quiet, square-shouldered, and so careful with words that people often mistook him for timid. They were wrong. Elias was not timid. He was precise. When I met him at his office, I brought everything I still had: printed invoices, old payroll reports, vendor statements, screenshots from the accounting system, copies of tax returns, and a flash drive with backups I had saved because I had always believed in keeping records twice. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, my hands were shaking from exhaustion. "I don't want revenge," I told him. "I just want to stop feeling like I'm crazy." Elias opened one of the folders, adjusted his glasses, and looked at a transaction report for nearly a full minute. Then he said, "Marin, you are not crazy." That was all. But I went home and cried in my friend's spare bedroom, like someone had finally handed me permission to breathe. For the next 6 weeks, Elias worked quietly. He never promised me a dramatic ending. He never said Gideon would lose everything. He only asked for documents, dates, account numbers, and copies of every notice I received from the court. Sometimes, he called with one question. Did Gideon ever mention a company named Ravelin? Did you sign anything related to the truck leases? Were you present when the Maple Street house was transferred? Each question felt small. Each answer seemed to make the silence on the other end heavier. By the time we entered the courtroom that morning, I had stopped expecting Gideon to feel guilty. I had stopped expecting his family to understand. I had stopped hoping he would look at me and remember the woman who had believed in him when he had nothing. All I wanted was the truth to stand up somewhere other than inside me. Gideon's attorney finished his statement and sat down. Judge Whitmore turned toward me. Mrs. Calloway, she said, do you have anything to add regarding your request for temporary support and asset protection? My lawyer, Dana Kessler, began to rise. But Gideon leaned back in his chair first. He looked at me for the first time that morning. There was no anger in his face, no fear, just the same soft confidence he had used the day he locked me out. You should take the offer, Marin, he said quietly. You don't have the money to fight me. For a second, the courtroom blurred at the edges. Then I looked past him. Elias was standing. He carried the black file to the front of the courtroom and placed it gently on the table beside my attorney. He did not slam it down. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at Gideon with hatred. He simply opened it. Your Honor, Elias said, before Mr. Calloway's financial position is accepted into the record, I believe the court should compare the account numbers, not the account names. For the first time since he had locked me out of my own home, Gideon stopped smiling. Judge Whitmore did not open the file herself. She looked at Dana first, then at Elias, then at Gideon's attorney, as if deciding whether the next 5 minutes belonged in a divorce hearing or somewhere much more serious. The courtroom had gone quiet enough that I could hear the air conditioner click on above us. Gideon's jaw tightened once. It was small, almost invisible. But I had lived with him long enough to recognize that look. It was not anger yet. It was calculation. Attorney Bell stood immediately. Your Honor, we object to any outside accountant offering conclusions without proper disclosure or discovery. Elias did not react. He kept one hand on the open folder, his thumb resting against a divider marked Transfer History. I am not offering conclusions, he said. I am asking the court not to accept Mr. Calloway's sworn financial statement without reviewing records that directly contradict it. Several of the companies listed as independent vendors share addresses, registered agents, and payment channels with entities connected to Mr. Calloway. Gideon's face changed then. Not much. Just enough. His confidence did not vanish. Gideon was not the kind of man who collapsed when cornered. He became quieter. His shoulders went still, his eyes narrowed, and his mouth formed that careful line I had seen whenever a supplier demanded money we could not pay. It was the face of a man deciding which version of the truth would cost him the least. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. Mr. Monroe, are you alleging concealed marital assets? I am saying the records suggest money was moved from Calloway Infrastructure through shell vendors and into accounts that do not appear on Mr. Calloway's financial disclosure, Elias replied. I am also saying Mrs. Calloway's access was removed shortly before those transfers became visible. Attorney Bell objected again, louder this time. Dana answered before the judge could respond. We are requesting an emergency preservation order, Your Honor. No withdrawals, transfers, sales, or changes to company ownership until forensic discovery is completed. Gideon finally looked at me. He did not look betrayed. He looked offended. That was the part I would remember later. Not fear, not remorse, offense, as though I had violated some private rule by refusing to disappear politely after he erased me. His eyes moved from my face to Elias, then to the open file. For a second I saw the man I had married underneath the expensive suit. Not the successful contractor, not the admired husband. Just Gideon with his old pickup truck, angry because someone had noticed the numbers did not add up. Judge Whitmore granted the preservation order. It was temporary. It was not victory. It did not put me back in my home or return the money Gideon had taken. It only stopped him from moving more of it while the court examined the records. But when the judge said all financial accounts connected to the parties and associated business entities are to remain unchanged, pending review, Gideon's fingers closed around the edge of the table. He had always believed control was something he owned. That morning, for the first time, it became something he might lose. Outside the courtroom, Gideon caught me near the elevators before Dana could reach me. He did not touch me. He knew better than that in a courthouse. He stood close enough for me to smell the expensive cologne he had started wearing during the last year of our marriage. It was unfamiliar on him, like the new watches, like the new clothes, like the version of himself he had built after deciding I no longer belonged in his life. "You have no idea what you just started," he said. I looked at him for a long moment. "I started nothing, Gideon." I asked questions. "You brought Elias into this because you're angry." "No," I said. "I brought Elias into this because he listens to numbers." His expression sharpened. "You think this makes you smart? You think a few old reports give you a right to destroy everything I built?" There it was again. The sentence he had used for years. Everything I built. I used to hear it as pride. That day I heard it as confession. "I never wanted to destroy anything," I said. "I wanted you to stop pretending I was never there." For the first time, something slipped in his face. Not guilt. Gideon did not give guilt easily. It was closer to panic, but he buried it quickly beneath contempt. "You should have taken the settlement," he said. "You will regret making this ugly." Then he walked away. I watched him disappear around the corner, his attorney rushing after him, and I felt something inside me settle. Not heal. Healing was still far away. But settle. Like dust after a door slammed. For months I had been living inside the version of me he created, unstable, dependent, confused, lucky to have been tolerated. Now I understood the real reason he had worked so hard to make me look small. Small people do not get believed. The first notice came 2 days later. A bank representative called Dana's office to confirm that 3 business accounts had been flagged under the preservation order. One was an account I recognized. It belonged to Callaway Infrastructure. The other 2 belonged to Ravelin Asset Management and Kestrel Development Group. Gideon had told the court those companies were unrelated vendors. But when Elias compared the records, the payments made from Callaway Infrastructure matched deposits into accounts controlled by the same registered agent. The names were different. The money was not. Elias explained it to me in his office with the patience of someone who knew I needed facts before I could survive feelings. Gideon had created a circle. Company money paid consulting fees to Ravelin. Ravelin paid equipment management costs to Kestrel. Kestrel then made deposits into accounts connected to a private holding company Gideon had formed without ever mentioning it to me. The company was called G.C. Holdings. Gideon Callaway Holdings. He had not even tried to be creative. The worst part was not that he had hidden money. The worst part was seeing how long he had planned it. The records went back almost 2 years. 2 years of late nights. 2 years of password changes. 2 years of him telling me I was paranoid whenever I noticed something strange. 2 years of him making me feel irresponsible for asking where the company money was going. He had been preparing his exit while I was still paying the bills that kept us alive. I remembered one night in particular. It had been raining hard, and the roof above our kitchen had started dripping into a mixing bowl near the stove. I was sitting at the table with a laptop open, trying to figure out why our payroll account was short by $40,000. Gideon came in after midnight, wet from the rain, and furious because I had called him 3 times. "I am trying to save this company," he snapped. "I'm trying to understand why the account is short." "You're trying to control me." I had apologized. That memory sat inside me like a stone. I had apologized for noticing theft. 3 weeks after the hearing, I received a package at my friend's apartment. It was from Gideon's sister, Brianna. Inside was a framed photograph from our 10th anniversary party. In it, Gideon had his arm around me, smiling wide, while I stood beside him in a green dress holding a glass of champagne. On the back of the frame was a note in Brianna's handwriting. "I don't know what is true anymore. But I know he has been calling you names I don't want to repeat. I should have asked you sooner." I stared at the note for a long time. Then I put the photograph back in the box. It was not that I hated Brianna. I did not. But apology had become too easy for people who had benefited from my silence. She had watched Gideon dismiss me for years. She had laughed at the jokes. She had accepted his version because it was convenient, because believing him meant she did not have to question the man she called her brother. I was tired of being asked to forgive people for arriving late to the truth. The divorce became public in the small way these things do. Not through headlines or gossip columns, but through contractors, vendors, employees, and relatives who suddenly understood why payments had stopped and meetings had been canceled. Gideon's office manager quit. 2 suppliers demanded clarification about overdue invoices. A project supervisor called me crying because Gideon had told the staff I had mishandled payroll and caused the financial problems. I believed him, she said. I'm sorry. I wanted to tell her it was all right. Instead, I said, please save every email you received. That was the first time I heard myself sound like the woman I had been before Gideon convinced me I was powerless. Dana helped me request records from every vendor I could remember. Elias built timelines. He color-coded transfers, matched invoices, and traced dates back to the same weeks Gideon had accused me of emotional instability. The pattern became clearer with every page. When Gideon needed an explanation for missing money, he blamed bad contracts. When he needed someone to look responsible, he blamed me. When he needed silence, he called it loyalty. One afternoon, Elias found something that changed the way I understood the house on Maple Street. The home had been transferred 6 months before Gideon locked me out. Not sold, not refinanced, transferred. He had moved it into a limited liability company called Maple Residential Holdings, claiming it was necessary to protect the property from business exposure. The documents carried his signature, the signature of an attorney I had never met, and a notarized statement stating that I had consented. I had never signed it. I knew that because the signature on the page looked almost like mine. Almost. My real signature has a slight hook at the end of the M in Marin. It comes from the way my mother taught me to write my name when I was little. The signature on the transfer document did not have that hook. It was smooth, practiced wrong. Elias stared at it for a few seconds, then closed the folder carefully. This, he said, is not a financial disagreement anymore. I felt cold, all over. For months I had been telling myself Gideon had been selfish, cruel, calculating. But forgery was different. It was not anger. It was not a bad marriage. It was a decision made with paperwork, witnesses, and intention. He had not simply locked me out of the house. He had been trying to erase the fact that I had ever had a claim to it. That night I drove past Maple Street for the first time since he changed the locks. I did not stop. I did not get out. I only slowed near the curb and looked at the white porch railings, the red maple leaves gathering along the driveway, the upstairs window where I used to fold laundry while Gideon took phone calls downstairs. The house looked exactly the same. That was the cruelty of it. A place can remain standing while everything inside it changes. A week later, Dana called me just after 9 at night. Her voice was calm, but I heard the urgency beneath it. Gideon filed an emergency motion, she said. For what? He is claiming the preservation order is damaging the company and putting employees at risk. He wants the court to release the accounts. I stood in my kitchen, one hand gripping the counter. Of course he did. Gideon would not come back, because he missed me. He would not admit what he had done. He would come back because the money had stopped moving, because the doors were closing around him, because he believed he could still use the same weapon he always had. Responsibility. Family. Fear. Then Dana said one more thing. He attached a statement from someone named Lacey Harper. She says you instructed her to alter company records before you left. For a moment I could not speak. Lacey. The young assistant Gideon had hired to streamline communication. The woman who had smiled at me across conference tables while quietly taking over my work. The woman who had watched Gideon cut me out, then stepped into the space I left behind. I looked down at the box Brianna had sent me. It was still sitting unopened on the chair by the door. Then I thought of the black file in Elias's office. I thought of the forged signature. I thought of every time Gideon had called me confused when I was simply paying attention. And for the first time I did not feel afraid of what he would say next. I felt ready to hear it. The emergency hearing was set for the following Thursday at 8:30 in the morning. Gideon wanted the court to believe that freezing the accounts would destroy the company, leave employees unpaid, and turn his private divorce into a public business failure. He had always been good at making his consequences sound like everyone else's crisis. Dana sent me the motion that night. 32 pages of legal language. carefully arranged to make him look like a man trying to protect jobs while his unstable wife tried to punish him. Lacey's statement was attached near the end. I read it at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside me. She claimed I had directed her to modify vendor entries before I left the company. She claimed I had been agitated, unpredictable, and obsessed with moving money out of accounts. The words sounded rehearsed. They were not Lacey's voice. I had known her only briefly, but I remembered how she wrote emails, short sentences, too many exclamation points, always ending with, "Thanks so much." This statement was polished. Too polished. Dana called the next morning and told me not to contact Lacey directly. "Let the documents speak first," she said. "If Gideon pressured her, we need to prove pressure. If she is cooperating with him willingly, we need to know that too." I understood the logic. I hated it anyway. For years I had been trained to react. Gideon would accuse me, and I would defend myself. Gideon would withdraw affection, and I would explain my feelings. Gideon would change the rules and I would scramble to understand what I had done wrong. But Dana was teaching me something different. Not every accusation deserved an immediate answer. Some lies needed room to expose themselves. Elias asked me to meet him at his office that afternoon. His building sat above a small insurance agency near the edge of downtown, with faded carpet in the hallway, and a brass plaque beside the elevator that had not been polished in years. Nothing about it looked powerful. There were no marble floors, no glass conference rooms, no assistant offering bottled water. But whenever I stepped into Elias's office, I felt steadier. Everything had a place there. Files were labeled. Receipts were dated. Numbers were not asked to flatter anyone. Elias had 3 folders waiting on the conference table. One was marked Access Logs. Another was marked Payroll Corrections. The third had no label at all. He sat down across from me, folded his hands and said, "Before we discuss Lacey Harper's statement, I need you to understand what I found in the internal accounting backups." I nodded, though my stomach had already tightened. He opened the first folder. The accounting system Gideon had locked me out of did not erase activity as cleanly as he believed. Every time a user accessed a file, changed an invoice, approved a payment, or altered a vendor profile, the system generated a timestamp. Gideon had changed my password and removed my permissions, but he had not deleted the backup archive. The archive was stored through an outside cloud provider, billed automatically to the company's old account. An account I had once managed. An account he had forgotten existed. Elias slid a printed timeline toward me. It showed dozens of account changes made during the final months I worked at Callaway Infrastructure. Many of the changes occurred after midnight. Some happened while I was at home asleep. Others occurred on days when I had been out of town visiting my mother. Every entry carried the same user ID. Not mine. Lacey's. At first I felt relief, a sharp, ugly kind of relief that made me want to laugh. There it was. Proof that I had not altered those records. Proof that Gideon had lied. Proof that the woman he put in my place had been inside the files he accused me of touching. Then Elias turned the page. The activity did not begin when Lacey was hired. It began 2 weeks before her official start date. I stared at the report trying to make sense of it. How could she access the system before she worked there? She could not, Elias said. Not through her own credentials. He tapped another line on the report. The account had been created under Lacey's name, but the original administrator authorization came from Gideon's executive login. The first changes had been entered after his account approved the user profile. The timing was too exact to be an accident. Gideon had created the access. Gideon had assigned privileges. Gideon had authorized the changes. Then he had blamed them on me. I felt something inside my chest close quietly. For months I had wondered whether Gideon had stopped loving me before he began hiding money. I had wondered whether there had been a moment when our marriage could have been saved if I had said the right thing, noticed something earlier, asked fewer questions, asked more questions. But sitting across from Elias looking at those timestamps, I understood something I had been afraid to admit. This was never about a failing marriage. It was about a man building an escape route and deciding I was easier to erase than to face. The third folder held copies of emails. Elias had not obtained them illegally. One of the company servers still archived outgoing messages under an old compliance setting. Dana had filed the correct request. The emails were not dramatic. There were no cartoonish confessions. No message that said, "Help me hide money from my wife." Gideon was smarter than that. But the pattern was there. He told Lacey which vendors to enter. He instructed her to keep the executive review notes private. He told her to change invoice dates to match the current reporting period. And once in an email sent at 1:14 a.m., he wrote, "Do not involve Marin. She gets emotional when she thinks she understands the numbers." I read that sentence 3 times. Not because it surprised me. Because seeing it in writing made the old wounds feel newly official. Lacey had replied 6 minutes later. "Understood. I just don't want to get blamed if this becomes an issue." Gideon had responded, "You won't. I'll handle Marin." Those 5 words stayed with me. "I'll handle Marin." That had been our marriage in one sentence. Every time I questioned a transfer, every time I noticed a missing document, every time I asked why a payroll account was suddenly short, he had not tried to answer me. He had been handling me. He had used comfort, anger, money, silence, and eventually the court system. But I was not a problem he could manage anymore. 2 days before the hearing, Lacey asked to meet me. The request came through Dana. Lacey had contacted her office from a personal email address and said she wanted to correct some parts of her statement. Dana did not tell me to get my hopes up. She had seen too many people change their minds only when pressure turned against them. But she arranged the meeting in a private conference room at her office, with an associate present and a recorder on the table. Lacey arrived 20 minutes late. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not younger. Smaller. Her hair was pulled into a tight knot, and she wore a gray sweater with sleeves that covered most of her hands. She kept looking toward the door as though Gideon might walk in at any moment. When she finally sat across from me, she did not say hello. I didn't know everything she said. It was not an apology. Not yet. I looked at her and waited. She swallowed hard. "When he hired me, he said you were stepping away because you were having a hard time. He said you had made mistakes with the books, and he needed someone organized to protect the company." I believed him. "Did you believe him when he told you to alter dates?" I asked. Her eyes dropped to the table. "No." The room went silent. Lacey's hands shook as she pulled a small flash drive from her purse and placed it beside the recorder. "I saved copies," she said. "Not because I was trying to help you. I was scared." He kept saying it was temporary. He said we were protecting the company from lawsuits. But then he started moving money and he told me not to ask questions. Dana's associate reached for the flash drive but did not touch it. "What is on that?" "Emails, screenshots, instructions, some voice messages." Lacey looked at me then, and the guilt in her face was real enough that I almost pitied her. Almost. "He made me sign the statement. He said if I didn't, he would tell everyone I was involved in the fraud. He said no one would believe me because I was the one entering the changes." "Were you involved?" I asked. Her mouth trembled. "Yes," she whispered. But I didn't know how far it had gone. I could have yelled at her. Part of me wanted to. She had walked into my office, learned where everything was, accepted my chair, and helped Gideon turn my work into evidence against me. She had watched him treat me like I was disposable. Then she had signed a statement designed to take away the last thing I had left. But anger was not the same as power. I had learned that too. "What made you change your mind?" I asked. Lacey looked toward the window. "His accounts froze," she said. "He stopped answering people. Employees started calling me. Vendors started asking why invoices were fake. Then he told me I needed to delete everything and leave town for a while." She looked back at me. That's when I understood he wasn't protecting me. He was setting me up. That was Gideon's real pattern. He made people feel chosen until they became inconvenient. Then he called their destruction necessary. Lacey gave Dana the flash drive. She agreed to provide a sworn statement, though she looked terrified when she said it. Dana explained that her cooperation would not erase what she had done, but it could matter. Lacey nodded as if she knew she did not deserve promises. Before she left, she paused near the door. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. I looked at her for a moment. "I hope you learn the difference between being trusted and being used," I said. Then she left. The night before the hearing, I went back to Maple Street. Not because I wanted to see Gideon. I did not. I had heard through Dana that he was still living there, though the house was now under review because of the forged transfer documents. I went because I needed to remember what the porch had felt like before he locked me out. I parked across the street under the maple tree and watched the lights in the house. The porch railing was still white. The front door was still blue. The same door I had painted with Gideon one Saturday when we were young and broke and laughing because we got more paint on ourselves than the wood. For a few minutes I let myself grieve that version of us. Not because I wanted him back. Because she deserved to be mourned, the woman who thought hard work could protect her from betrayal. The woman who believed being useful would make her safe. The woman who kept every receipt but did not understand that the person closest to her might one day try to turn the ledger into a weapon. Then I opened my purse and took out my wedding ring. I had carried it with me for months. I did not throw it into the street. I did not leave it on the porch. I did not make a scene for anyone to find. I placed it in a small velvet box, closed the lid, and set it inside the glove compartment. It was not a symbol of love anymore. It was evidence of what I survived. The next morning, Dana arrived at my friend's apartment before sunrise. She wore a dark suit and carried 2 leather folders. Elias came 10 minutes later with the black file from the first hearing. He looked exactly as he always did, plain gray tie-worn leather briefcase, calm expression. But when he placed the file on the kitchen table, I noticed how thick it had become. The folder that had once held questions now held answers. Dana reviewed the plan one final time. The access logs, the shell companies, the forged signature, Lacey's original statement compared with her new sworn declaration, the archived emails, the voice messages, the transfer history, Gideon's own financial disclosure, which now looked less like a legal document and more like a list of omissions. He is going to deny everything, Dana said. I know, I replied. He may blame Lacey. He may say the records were misunderstood. He may try to make this about your marriage instead of the money. I know. Elias looked at me over the rim of his glasses. You do not need to convince him, he said. You only need to tell the truth clearly. That sentence steadied me more than any speech could have. When we arrived at the courthouse, Gideon was already there. He stood near the courtroom doors with Attorney Bell wearing another expensive suit and speaking in a low voice. For 1 second he looked exactly like he had at the first hearing, composed, confident, certain that the room would bend around him. Then he saw Elias carrying the black file. His eyes moved to Dana's folders. Then to me. This time he did not smile. The courtroom doors opened. And Gideon walked in first, still believing he could explain the numbers away. He had no idea that before the morning ended, every account he hid behind a different name would become impossible to deny. Gideon's attorney began exactly the way Dana predicted he would. He spoke about jobs, payroll suppliers, and the pressure of running a business during a difficult divorce. He called the preservation order overbroad. He called the financial questions misunderstandings. He called the frozen accounts a threat to innocent employees who had done nothing wrong. He never called them what they were. Hidden. Judge Whitmore listened without interrupting. Gideon sat beside his attorney, with both hands folded neatly in front of him. His face was pale, but his posture was controlled. He still believed a confident man in a tailored suit could turn fraud into a paperwork dispute. Then Dana stood. Your Honor, she said, Mrs. Calloway agrees that the employees deserve protection. That is precisely why the court needs to know where the company's money went. Attorney Bell objected. Dana continued anyway. She placed the first folder on the table. It contained the account access logs. Elias took the witness stand with the same quiet expression he had worn in every office meeting, every phone call, every moment when I felt myself beginning to panic. He did not perform for the courtroom. He did not use dramatic language. He simply explained the system, the timestamps, the administrator permissions, and the sequence of changes made to company records. He pointed to the entries created under Lacey's account, before Lacey officially worked for Calloway Infrastructure. Then he pointed to the executive authorization. Mr. Calloway created the account, Elias said. Mr. Calloway assigned its access level. Mr. Calloway approved the vendor modifications later attributed to Mrs. Calloway. Gideon stared at the table. Attorney Bell tried to suggest that Gideon had delegated routine tasks to staff. Elias nodded once. That would be a reasonable explanation, he said, if the same executive authorization had not been used to approve transfers into entities Mr. Calloway failed to disclose. The courtroom became still. Elias opened the black file. He did not rush. He turned each divider with careful fingers, laying out the records in a sequence anyone could follow. Callaway Infrastructure paid Ravelin Asset Management. Ravelin paid Kestrel Development Group. Kestrel moved money into G.C. Holdings. From there, the funds traveled into accounts Gideon had never listed in his financial disclosure. Different names, same control. The amounts were not small. One transfer covered nearly 3 months of payroll. Another matched the down payment on a private condo in Scottsdale, Arizona. A third had been used to pay off a loan Gideon claimed did not exist. Every number Elias named landed in the courtroom with a weight I could almost feel in my chest. For years, Gideon had made money sound complicated, so I would stop asking about it. Now the numbers were speaking without him. Attorney Bell stood and questioned Elias for nearly 40 minutes. He asked whether an accountant could prove intent from transaction records alone. He asked whether company structures sometimes involved complicated tax planning. He asked whether a wife unfamiliar with executive decisions might misunderstand normal business activity. Elias did not become defensive. No, he said calmly. A wife who built the company's bookkeeping system would understand the difference between legitimate vendor activity and concealed self-dealing. I felt tears burn behind my eyes. Not because I needed anyone to praise me. Because someone had finally said the truth out loud, in a room where Gideon could not interrupt. Then Dana called Lacey. Lacey walked to the witness stand, wearing the same gray sweater she had worn in Dana's office. Her hands shook as she took the oath. Gideon did not look at her. He stared forward, his jaw tight as though refusing to acknowledge her could make her disappear. Dana asked simple questions. Did Gideon instruct her to alter vendor dates? Yes. Did he tell her not to involve me? Yes. Did he ask her to sign a statement blaming me for records she did not create alone? Yes. Did he threaten to blame her if she refused? Lacey looked directly at Judge Whitmore. Yes. Gideon finally turned toward her. It was not a dramatic movement, just his head slowly with a look so cold that I saw Lacey's shoulders tense. I knew that look. I had spent years reacting to it. It was the look that said, "You are making a mistake by crossing me." But Lacey did not take her words back. Dana played 2 voice messages from the flash drive. The first was Gideon telling Lacey to clean up the dates before Marin starts asking questions again. The second was worse. In it, Gideon told her that if anyone investigated, she needed to remember that Marin had always been unstable around financial stress. There was a pause after the recording ended. Not a legal pause. A woman one. Judge Whitmore looked at Gideon for a long moment. "Mr. Callaway," she said, "would you like to explain why your employee was instructed to alter records and attribute concerns to your wife?" Gideon stood. For the first time, his voice was not smooth. "This is being taken out of context," he said. "Lacey was inexperienced. Marin was upset. The company was under pressure. I was trying to protect everyone." There it was. Protect everyone. He had used those words before. He used them when he moved money, when he changed passwords, when he locked me out, when he told his family I was stressed, when he filed court papers saying I had no power. Every act of betrayal had been wrapped in responsibility. Dana rose slowly. "Protect everyone from what?" she asked. Gideon looked at her. "From her," Dana continued. "Or from discovery." He did not answer. Then Dana placed the forged Maple Street transfer on the evidence table. I watched Gideon's eyes move to the page. For the first time that morning, real fear crossed his face. It did not stay long. He tried to hide it. But I saw it. So did Judge Whitmore. Dana asked the court to compare the signature on the document with my verified signature from our tax filings and mortgage paperwork. The difference was small. A missing hook at the end of my name, a curve Gideon had never noticed because he had spent so long looking past me. But the difference was enough. Judge Whitmore reviewed the document, then looked at Gideon's attorney. Did Mr. Callaway disclose this transfer when he asserted that the marital home was beyond Mrs. Callaway's reach? Attorney Bell hesitated. That hesitation told the courtroom more than any speech could have. "I was informed the transfer had been properly executed," he said. Judge Whitmore's expression did not change. "By whom?" Attorney Bell did not answer. The hearing lasted another hour. Gideon tried to redirect blame toward Lacey. He suggested that the registered agent handling the shell companies had acted independently. He claimed the transfer of Maple Street was part of routine asset protection. He said he had intended to disclose everything after the divorce stabilized. Every explanation sounded weaker than the one before. Because the records did not need his permission to exist. They had dates. They had signatures. They had bank routes. They had his name. When Judge Whitmore finally spoke, no one moved. She granted Dana's request for a full forensic accounting. She expanded the preservation order to include every account connected to G.C. Holdings, Ravelin Asset Management, Kestrel Development Group, and Maple Residential Holdings. She ordered that no property could be sold, transferred, refinanced, or withdrawn from without court approval. Then she referred the forged signature and concealed asset evidence to the appropriate authorities for further review. Gideon's hidden accounts were frozen before he could move another dollar. Every account he had built to keep me powerless became a locked door. He sat down slowly after the judge finished. I expected to feel triumphant. I did not. I felt tired. Not defeated, not empty. Just tired in the deep, honest way a person feels after carrying something heavy for too long and finally setting it down. Gideon looked smaller then, but not because he had lost money. He looked smaller because the story he had built around himself had collapsed. He was not the protector. He was not the provider. He was not the man holding everything together. He was a man who stole from the business his wife helped build, then tried to convince the court she had never mattered. Outside the courtroom, Gideon caught up with me one last time. Dana and Elias were a few steps ahead, speaking quietly near the elevators. Gideon did not call my name loudly. He said it the way he used to when we were alone in the kitchen, and he wanted me to doubt my own instincts. Marin. I turned. His face was different now. The certainty was gone. Underneath the anger, I could see something close to desperation. You wanted to ruin me, he said. I looked at him for a moment. No, I said. You ruined yourself when you decided I was easier to erase than to respect. He flinched. Just slightly. Then he said the words I knew were coming. After everything I gave you. For years, that sentence would have broken me. I would have started listing my contributions, defending my labor, reminding him what I had sacrificed. I would have argued until he felt powerful again. But I did not owe him another explanation. You gave me a lesson, I said. I stopped mistaking it for love. Then I walked away. The divorce took months to finalize. The forensic review uncovered more than I had known about. Gideon had used company money for the Scottsdale condo, private travel, personal debts, and payments to a contractor who had never completed a single job for Callaway Infrastructure. The company survived only because the court appointed an independent financial manager to protect payroll and ongoing projects. Several employees kept their jobs. That mattered to me. They had families, mortgages, children waiting at home. They should not have paid for Gideon's choices just because he had hidden behind their names in court. Maple Street was eventually sold through the proper process. I did not fight to move back in. By then I understood that a house could hold too much history to become home again. I received my fair share along with the funds Gideon had tried to hide. It was not revenge money. It was mine. The first thing I bought was not a car, a vacation, or something designed to prove I had won. I rented a small brick townhouse near Luce Park with tall windows and a narrow porch just wide enough for 2 chairs. I painted the front door blue myself. Not the same shade as Maple Street. A brighter one. Elias retired the following spring. Before his last day, he gave me a simple leather notebook with blank pages inside. On the first page, he had written one sentence in his careful handwriting. Keep records. Keep your voice. I cried when I read it. Not because I was still broken. Because I finally understood that I had never been powerless. I had been isolated. There was a difference. Gideon had spent years convincing me that being quiet meant I had no strength, but silence had never meant surrender. It had only meant I was waiting until I could see clearly. I still think about the porch on Maple Street sometimes. Not with longing. With clarity. That porch was where Gideon left an envelope telling me I needed space to calm down. He thought he had pushed me outside of my own life. He thought a locked door, a closed account, and a carefully written lie could make me disappear. But doors can lock from both sides. And once I stopped begging to be let back into the life he controlled, I built one where he no longer had a key.